Yeah, I think if it's okay, we'll try to start. I won't, we won't try to go around the room and everybody introduce themselves. But, you know, what our hope was that we would be able to have the potential for, you know, all voices to be heard as best we could do. I know what I was trying to do with, you know, sort of setting this up was make sure that I tried to get things out to networks of people who loved OSHA, cared about OSHA, maybe hated OSHA, worked for OSHA, you know, in all different capacities. So we wanted to make sure that we had a chance to kind of have all voices get heard, even if we're seeing this as kind of a informal effort to have a birthday party and a remembrance. So I had only tried to specifically reach out to Mark to give us a little video context in terms of a historical piece from 50 years ago today of what exactly happened at the signing ceremony. And then I had also reached out to Earl Dotter, and I don't know if Earl's on yet.
Not yet.
But Earl was doing a pictorial essay about OSHA and, you know, some of the work that that he had done in terms of documentation, and then tried to reach out to a couple of assistant secretaries and probably start with David and then maybe work backwards, and then really be able to open it up. And kind of the concept of this was, besides being like a reunion and being both a happy time and a somber time, given the moment that we're in, that we'd be able to have people kind of speak to, you know, one good wish or remembrance they had of OSHA and one kind of good wish going forward. So if it's okay, Joy, do you want to sort of talk a little logistics or whatever?
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chip. So if we kindly ask that if you are not speaking to mute your lines for now, just so that we don't get any feedback, and you will have control to mute yourself and unmute yourself. If you would like to speak, as Chip said earlier, feel free to raise your hand, and then we can call on you or send me a message in the chat box or write your name on chat message. And, you know, in order to do this in an orderly fashion, we will call you out and then you can unmute yourself. Don't be alarmed if you suddenly become muted or muted. I will be trying to control some of the feedbacks if there is any. So if you have any other technical difficulties, feel free to let me know. Is there anything else? Chip?
I think that was all. Yeah.
Okay.
Why don't we get started? Mark, turning it over to you to share your screen and then sort of talk us through, you know, 50 years ago, what was kind of the context of how the OSHA Act came to be. And I also forgot to mention that we have a person who was in the room who also has his signing pen from President Nixon. So why do we'll see if we do Mark, and then if Earl comes, we'll do Earl, but if Earl doesn't come, then we'll do Don. Okay? Mark, to you.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Chip. Thanks for pulling this together, and thanks to everyone for being here. This is really kind of a wonderful event. And so what I have are, I'm going to share the screen. I have two short video clips that I wanted to show that were taken of the actual signing ceremony when the OSHA Act came into existence 50 years ago. See if this works. There we go. Can you see the screen?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm going to show are two of the remarks that were made. The first one is by the then Secretary of Labor, Hodson, on his remarks about the reason for the signing of the OSHA Act, and then the president after that. And these are both just about 2-minute clips from longer statements. And the longer statements are on my YouTube channel, and this is the URL for it below here, but I'll just play these two clips because I think there's some really, really interesting, powerful statements that they both made. And certainly there are incredible politics that took place at the time, but I think these historical signing statements are especially poignant to me when we see what's happening with OSHA today.
Through the years, federal legislation has been marked by some truly milestone measures in the field of worker protection. When you think back, there's the Social Security Act with its provisions to provide a cushion for various kinds of economic adversity, the National Labor Relations Act with provisions protecting organizing rights and concerted activity, then the Fair Labor Standards Act with provisions to prevent abuses in hours and conditions of wages and work. Well, through all this period, there had been, it seems to us, a gap in worker protection, namely with regard to his safety and health. Now, it's rather curious that more attention hadn't been paid to this subject earlier. Through the years, a number of workers were killed, were injured, or fell ill due to working conditions on the job. But it's only been in the last few years that there has been special concern shown for federal legislation in this subject area. And there are probably two fundamental reasons for this almost sudden surge of concern. First of all, we're a progress-minded nation. And I think it began to dawn on us a few years ago that in the area of workplace safety, we were backsliding. That in fact, as our bar chart, our blue bar chart on the left over here shows, that since 1958, the safety conditions had worsened in the American workplace. Well, the conclusion was inescapable. Something had to be done. And then, too, the last few years have shown birth of what might be called a new national passion for environmental improvement. When you come to think of it, what environment is more important to 80 million working Americans than their workplace? Aside from their homes, this is primarily where they spend their time. So this bill that we have before us today constitutes another piece of landmark legislation in the area of worker protection. We believe that the nation should be proud of this bill.
So this footage is actually inspired by Don, because Don had told me for years how powerful these statements were, and so I was searching for some sort of video or audio of this, figuring that somebody had this, and eventually found this footage of both of these remarks in the sort of hidden away in the National Archive in College Park, and it was actually in a file that was a USAID, and it was apparently meant for use overseas, not for domestic use. And they had the audio and then some little bit of footage of the president. And so this next video clip, again, it's the president's clips of his key remarks, but with a little bit of footage, and I've added in some other clips from historical footage just to kind of fill in the background. But you'll see the actual footage. If anyone's aware that there was actual complete film footage of more of the event, I'd love to know if that's available and where it might be, and try to help make it public. So these are the remarks then of President Nixon on the signing, the key remarks of President Nixon on the signing of the OSHA Act.
Mr. Secretary and all of our distinguished guests, before I sign this bill and then hand the signing pen to the Secretary of Labor, and others will be available to all of the guests here so that you can have a memento of the occasion, I would like to respond to the remarks of the Secretary. We have perhaps one of the most important pieces of legislation to pass in this Congress, but as the Secretary of Labor has already indicated, probably one of the most important pieces of legislation from the standpoint of 55 million people who will be covered by it, ever passed by the Congress of the United States, because it involves their lives. 12,500 people lost their lives in accidents in America's factories and in other places of business. And over 2 million people were injured. This bill deals with that. It goes beyond that. It deals with the environment in which the people, the 55 million Americans who are covered by it, will be working. And it provides for an institute which will look into the problems of the environment, the problems of noise, the problems of cleanliness, all of these things that can affect health in an indirect way. And so it is, as the Secretary has indicated, a landmark piece of legislation. And so we see a bill that represents in its culmination the American system at its best. Democrats, Republicans, the House, the Senate, the White House, business, labor, all cooperating in a common goal: the saving of lives, the avoiding of injuries, making the places of work for 55 million Americans safer and more pleasant places. This is certainly a great goal. Today is a day when we can all be proud. The Congress can be proud. The Senate, the House, the Republicans, the Democrats, and of course the administration. And we thank you, therefore, for your part in making it possible for the President of the United States now to attach his name to a bill that took so many hours of work, represents so much devotion, and that's going to do so much good for so many.
Okay, so that's the bill is now signed 50 years later. So thanks, Don, for the inspiration to go look for those films and help keep that, at least the amazing sort of words about what OSHA's promise could be alive 50 years ago. And we know it's had lots of ups and downs, but it feels good to me right now as we go into the new administration after this last sort of horrendous year to sort of be re-inspired by the words of these two folks from the original signing ceremony. So, and if anybody's interested in copies of these, I'm happy to share, or you can find them on my YouTube channel. And I put my email address in the chat box, so you can grab that if you need it. So, thanks, Chip. Thanks so much,
Mark. Those are kind of unlikely heroes of worker safety and health, but it is interesting historically to think about the context that they were in that moved them in that direction. And also thinking in terms of the bigger environmental movement that sort of pushed us towards that, and the disasters like the coal mine disasters. Yeah, I wondered, Earl is still coming on, so I thought, Don, if I could turn it over to you maybe for some kind of historical context of both where the act came from and sort of those moments of the birth as a midwife.
Sure. I think I'm unmuted.
You're good.
If in order to understand where you were with OSHA, you had to remember what had happened with the mine workers and the disaster at Farmington.
Farmington, yeah.
Yeah, Farmington, which really led to the coal mine, first Coal Mine Health and Safety Act, 1968 or so. That was setting a standard for what needed to be done for the rest of the industry. And you had the industry all over. And you had, at that time, groups of, I won't exactly call them lobbyists, but I guess they were lobbyists who represented, obviously, organized labor, and ranging from everybody had a piece of the action, but particularly the steel workers and the textile workers, because the issues were, for example, brown lung, which we probably haven't heard of in a while, except in some areas of the South. And they were pushing on their end. And of course, the steel worker group, and I have to pay a tribute to the late Jack Sheehan, who was representing the steel workers at the time with great skill and enormous energy. For a guy who said he didn't know much, he certainly demonstrated a lot. But the point was that not only were the unions out to do something, at the same time, and I'm still notwithstanding Secretary Hodgson's and the president's remarks, I'm still not sure exactly how the Chamber of Commerce wound up as the advocate for workers. But in the sense of how this kind of a bill got put together, and with those of you who were not familiar with legislation only recently, the working group was about 8 or 10 people. There's a couple of people from I think one from the chamber, somebody maybe from the NAM, a couple of lobbyists from the AFL-CIO, and certainly on the Senate side, there was Senator Williams' staff, which I was on, he was chairman of the Labor Committee, and Senator Javits, who had a very strong interest, and his staff guys did, and he of course was pushing for things like NIOSH, and that was it. So on any given day, if you wanted to talk about an issue, you could have 8 or 10, maybe 7 or 8, go have lunch at one of the restaurants near the Senate office building, and work out what you wanted to do. Okay.
Hey, Don, was there any effort to have field hearings to sort of document?
Oh yes,
the problem?
oh yes. That's how I got involved. They had, I think, a couple of field hearings. I wound up, I think, with one of the field hearings in maybe it was Stevens Company,
JP
Stevens,
Know them well.
on the textile side. And then we were at a steel mill in outside of Pittsburgh. It was one of the steel mills there, and I remember distinctly because it was one of my first trips as a staff person, and I didn't understand very much at the time. But Senator Williams was taken up to show what the health issues, safety issues really on the coke ovens. And so he went up to the top of a coke oven and managed to put his shoe on one of the vents coming out. And so he got a hell of a hot foot. And I remember most of us on the staff who saw that happen concluded on the way out that took care of the bill, because he was not about to back off of anything after getting the hot foot. But that's how things happen. But yeah, they had at least, I can't remember exactly, but they had the Weirton was steel was one of them, JP Stevens, and maybe somebody else, but that was the hearings that they had over the, well, the last hearings they had were in the spring of 1970, because that's when I went to work for the Senate. And the first thing they asked me to do was to go on a field hearing. And that was my
You were trained. That was your training.
trained. But what I was trying to point out is that this was at the time, was a very closed corporation, as it were, of people who spent their time working on this kind of legislation. You did not have the 5,000 people from the grassroots showing up. It was really much smaller. Now, that doesn't mean that the issues were not covered, because these folks who were involved were very smart. But they had really the control, as it were, over how the legislation was going to move. And when it passed the Senate, I thought the most interesting thing, and it was my first experience on the Senate floor handling a piece of a bill. And I remember after the vote, I think it was a very high number. I can't remember exactly, maybe 86-3 or something like that. I said to Senator Williams, I said, I don't think these folks know what they've done. And off we went.
Thank God nobody read it.
Well, at that time they were reading it, because you had the senator from Colorado was very interested in the piece on there about thing for aircraft warning, aircraft, something on there about airplane, in case an airplane crashed, that a beeper kind of thing. And there, of course, was the add-on of the National Workmen's Compensation Commission as another little piece of the action, which was Senator Javitz's idea. And then there was the bill itself, which by today's standards, you have a half a century of reasons why the bill shouldn't have been passed, or Williams' reasons why the people who were in favor of the bill and supported the bill were stupid and not doing all these other things to make it even stronger. And I take a certain amount of guilt in all of that, because much of what we were dealing with as major issues turned out not to be major issues. And then, of course, there's the laundry list of all the issues that were. So,
Hey, Don, where did the idea of...
it was a I'm trying to think of the term. It was a collective kind of agreement that typically was in the legislation of the 70s. That whether it was the compensation legislation or the pension legislation or any of those things, there was a collection of the various parties. You know, you got something because you had the votes for it, and you didn't get something because you didn't have the votes for it. And that's how you put the bill together.
Don, in terms of having NIOSH be created and kind of that research base, do you have any remembrance of how that happened with the public health involvement?
Yeah, absolutely. It was my favorite example of how you have interesting legislation put together. This was a Javits initiative, all right? And he really wanted, was pushing for this separate idea of the NIOSH would do the principled work and the high-powered work and the fancy work, And then it would go to the Secretary of Labor, who would have to chew it up to get the votes. But the way in which it got put together, the actual language, was a very short series of staff meetings. There may have been two, with Senator Javits' guy and Gene Middleman and Bob Nagel and me. And we wrote what we thought was what the NIOSH people should have. And whether or not that actually got much review over at whatever NIOSH was at the time, I can't say, because the Labor Department, for the most part, was not directly involved on the kind of staff thing that you had in those days. Unless, we made a phone call or two to people. And since Bob Nagel and Jerry Fader and I had all come from the Labor Department Solicitor's Office, we kind of had a back door as to what needed to be done, or from our own experience. You want me to talk about state plans?
Let's not talk about all the compromises you have to make.
No, but each of the things that was taking place at the time, right?
Yeah.
Each of the parade of either great things or horribles, depending on how you want to look at it, came from experiences either under the Mine Safety Act or under the Fair Labor Standards Act or under one or more of the labor protections that we had at the time.
I think we're getting a couple of comments in the chat. Peg was talking about Javits' history. There's been some discussions about the public hearings that were held, like in Houston and other places.
That was before my time.
Yeah. So Donald, thank you for that background. Really great. I just wanted to ask if Earl is available and ready to go. Earl, I know you're on.
I'm here. I can.
Would you like to grab the screen? If
Yeah, if you can let me share my screen, I will find hopefully my PowerPoint. Let's see if we.
Earl, you're a co-host if you want to share. Okay.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Let me see. Pardon me for.
It's okay. Just to introduce, Earl has been, for many years, a recorder of worker safety and health in this country. He actually has done a lot of documentation of many stages of OSHA's history and also of our workplace. And I have a particular memory of him, in Harlan County, Kentucky, but then later, I think we all remember in terms of the work Earl did for Eula Bingham and for OSHA, that was not fully appreciated by subsequent people who took over. But anyway, I think he's always been a person who's done great documentation of the front lines of really what health and safety is all about. Earl.
So I'm close.
Yeah, I can see your close. You're on your screen, so you're sharing. If you
open that particular file, then we'll be able to go, I think. Okay.
Yeah. Or if you can't, yeah, there you go. And maybe put it in presentation.
Slideshow format. Here we go. We're getting closer.
You can go bottom or whatever.
Okay. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes, you sound really good. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Just.
Yeah, if you go in the bottom right-hand corner, you can do presentation if you're having trouble up top.
All right.
But yeah. Okay, there you go. Great.
All right.
Take it away.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm pleased to be here with such distinguished company, folks I've worked with in the past and present. I have been a little bit challenged today because I suffered a computer crash recently and tried to get my programs back on quickly and prepare for this afternoon. And so this may be a little less organized than I would like, but my involvement with health and safety began as a VISTA volunteer in 1968 after the Farmington mine disaster, which of course claimed 78 lives tragically, and led to initiatives by, let me see if I can get this to advance here now, by coal miners, black lung victims. Here you see Hobart Grills from Harlan County, Kentucky on the left with his Miners for Democracy mailbox, and Jack Smith, a photo that Don Stillman took of a severely injured coal miner in West Virginia. Both of those events after Farmington, the continuing toll of black lung and mining injuries led to involvement in an effort to reform the Mine Workers Union. I spent 5 years following those issues of black lung disease and continuing fatalities. And it was a formative period for me that some of my associates who I work with directly, Matt Witt, ended up at OSHA, and Karen Omens as well. And they kind of put me in the view of Eula Bingham and her assistants as ways to illustrate the initiatives that began with Richard Nixon signing the Occupational Health and Safety Act in the latter part of 1970. I was privileged to photograph images that related to the benzene standard, right to know initiatives, of course, the cotton dust standard. And I recently, well, a year ago, spoke to Eula about how Jimmy Carter had her back with regard to promulgating that standard with a lot of pushback from the textile industry. So this is a formative time for me. I encountered this sign in a mill village in Greensboro, South Carolina. The workers who had become disabled from exposure to cotton dust had made their mill village a hospital zone. So that because their coughing kept them awake throughout the day and night, they needed to get rest anytime they could catch their chance. And so they created this hospital zone, and at the same time created a phrase that I thought was apt for occupational illness, a quiet sickness in our bodies, a quiet sickness in societally in terms of how occupational disease is underreported and underrecognized. And so I thought this was an apt title for an exhibit I created and later a book of the same name. So these are a number of images that I took. I worked with Mimi Conway on her book, Rise Gonna Rise, A Portrait of Southern Textile Workers, which was an adjunct to my work with Chip, with the Carolina Brown Lung Association, and many other folks who are still involved today. And it was an experience that I feel firmly grounded me in a career focusing on occupational health and safety. Of course, the pushback that occurred when the transfer to the Reagan administration was felt directly in at OSHA as the cotton dust standard that had been recently promulgated. The literature that was prepared, 10,000 copies of this brochure with Lewis Harrell's photograph on the front, was republished by Thorn Octor after those 10,000 copies had been shredded, and all the films that were to acquaint mill workers with the new standard and the ways they could utilize the new standard in their workplace. That accessibility was reduced, and the brochure on the right is Thorn Octor's response to what had been created, and I felt aptly personalized the plight of brown lung victims. Lewis Harrell was already dead from brown lung disease by the time this photograph was published. Of course, we all look to OSHA in regard to ergonomics, and I got focused on those many issues over the years. Here, a auto worker installing a roof rack in a job that's not well designed for him. He has a heavy impact wrench far out from his body frame. Michael Silverstein was the health and safety director at the Auto Workers Health and Safety Department. And you could see the impact of good job design in relation to the previous image, where this woman is easily handling two impact wrenches far away from her body frame with counterweights to suspend those wrenches so they could be easily manipulated and used in the Maytag washer factory where I photographed in Newton, Iowa. And I had the privilege of meeting up with Eula last year at the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization. She spoke passionately about her role and the role of advocates like Irving Selikoff, and it was really a pleasure to make contact with her. Here, Dick Lemon is giving her an award from the Asbestos Disease Awareness Organization. So that pretty much is my spiel, and thank you very much.
Thanks so much, Earl. Yeah, I wondered if we could maybe go around the room, and I wanted to maybe call on Peg Seminario next, who I was trying to think of people who had been around a really long time. And Peg, I think you're on, and I wondered if you would like to say a few words.
So I have been around for a long time, but I was not there with Don Elisberg in the room when it happened. So, but I do have in my library that I brought home from the AFL-CIO 2 copies of the legislative history of the Occupational Safety and Health Act, which I actually have had the occasion, even since my retirement, to go back to, and it's very well loved. That's why I have 2, because one is totally falling apart. And because Don was kind enough, and others, to bequeath us a couple of copies, I think I did leave one to my colleague Rebecca Reindell. So they are in good hands, and they are well loved and well utilized. All I can say is that the history of OSHA and the Occupational Safety and Health Act, the foundation of it, was so solid when you think about it. It was because the foundation, the legislative history, the act itself, all those good words that you and your, the cabal who was involved with this drafted here, Don, really brought us a very high, not the highest, but a very high level of protection and a standard for workers to be protected in the US. And so, and withstood, all kinds of court challenges over the years. And so when you think about what happened, because this didn't come easy, and one of the questions I put in the chat was, why was it at the end of a Congress, lame duck, last hour, last minute, that this bill finally got done? Because obviously there were all these different versions. The legislative history's got like 5 different versions, and you've got, you've got Javits, you've got Williams, you've got the administration, but you've got like 5 different bills here, and trying to keep them all straight as to what actually came together. So that's one question, as to why it all happened at that last minute in a lame duck, like today, right? Here we are. Like, this doesn't normally happen. So that was one question. But I think to just look at this, could we do this today? Get this done? And I think, clearly the answer to that is no. It was a different time, as Don said, and that this was able to come together and happen. But then what happened after that was people felt very paternal, mostly maternal as well, with Eula and others, that this was really important, and put the energy and the passion into making it something that actually made a difference. And so, I think that all of us should be quite grateful, really, really grateful for the foundation that was set 50 years ago by Don and others in the room, however this magic came together, to move forward. And we've never really had the opportunity, been able to strengthen and amend it. But the fact that the foundation was so strong enables us still to actually build off of it and protect workers today. So thank you to Elisberg, thanks to George Taylor and Jack Sheehan, Tony Mazzocchi, everyone who, Jacob Javits and Pete Williams, all of them who were involved with this this effort, which did not come easy. So, and none of it comes easy. And, we're just fortunate to have the ability to build off something which has left us a sound foundation to protect workers in this country. Not enough, still lots of work to do, but a good foundation that has served us very well.
Beautiful, beautiful. I know Carol Rice is on, and Carol, you also have a long memory. I know you weren't at the table, but you actually
As a child.
can channel Eula if you're available.
Thanks for that reference, Don. That makes me feel good. I was exchanging emails with Chip this morning, and one of the things that I don't think got brought up in the memorial to Eula, and I see John and Andrea on, they will remember this better than I am sure, but one of the things that Eula was very proud of from her Cincinnati roots at Kettering was rate retention for the lead workers, and that no one should be moved out of a job without retaining their rate of pay. And that's a really important piece that went into that lead standard, I think.
Carol, you had also mentioned the carcinogen standards. Do you want to say anything about that as a pretty big thing?
Well, one of the things that I think, looking back now, it's very impressive, and as we find it more and more difficult to generate any standards within a working lifetime of the OSHA folks, is that the first carcinogen standards went in as a block. And that was a really important transition from a single number, from ANSI or ACGIH, to something with not as much detail, obviously, as the specific standards now. But it was a good step, and it just got done. And obviously took some effort. But Don, how did that happen so quickly?
I don't remember. That was after the bill was passed, so I don't know what they were doing over there in the Labor Department. But I think it was, I was going to say that attention to these statutes comes and goes. The first couple of years of OSHA, I think we have to write off as an aberration, because well, nowadays that would be normal, but in those days, the idea of putting such difficult or incompetent people in charge of the new statute makes no sense. And for the Nixon administration, with its high-flown rhetoric, to permit that kind of situation was really uncalled for. It was also a question that Congress in those days, right, was not, really was not equipped to do intensive looking at what was going on in the agencies, oversight. They were busy writing statutes and not doing the level of oversight that now we're accustomed to. And the thing just got out of hand. Eula, in many respects, was blessed by her predecessor, Mort Korn, who kind of showed up and said, we need some adults in the room. Everybody agreed, he was at least a professional who tried to do professional work, and left her with something more than the disaster he had inherited. I might also point out one other thing that's not generally known. We all talk about our asbestos work and our Dr. Selikoff. And I distinctly remember while we were considering the bill, Dr. Selikoff came in one day with some guy from, short guy, from the asbestos company. And he wanted to testify and wanted to talk about this white lung that they had. And generally, the consensus of staff people there was, we have brown lung, we have black lung, we're overwhelmed. Can you come back sometime and talk about asbestos? Because that was just the momentum of what was being, what was happening. Of course, in the end, Dr. He wound up sort of taking over the whole thing because of the enormity of the asbestos diseases.
Can I kick it over to two other people? David Michaels going to join us, and also I think John Freunds and Andrea wanted to say something. Also just noting David Goldsmith just mentioned Shelley Samuels, who is again another really important person who, you know, wow, fought the good fight, still fights.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, thanks. It's very important we take a moment to just remember Eula, who ought to be with us today. Her imprint on the agency is, I'm sure, greater than anyone else who's ever worked there. And she set the bar so high. I mean, following up on what Peg said, the people who wrote this law and got through put some very important things in it. Then Eula, Mort Korn to some extent also, and Eula set the bar so high that the expectations of this agency really have remained high. That this is seen as an agency that's expected to do something, when it doesn't, it's very clear. And so let's even maybe take a moment and just think of Eula here for a moment.
Thank you for that moment, David.
Chip, you had asked, I wanted to bring us maybe forward a little bit. When I started in safety and health in the mid-'70s, and I worked at Montefiore, and actually Earl Dotter came up and did a lot of his photographs there because they were the only hospital that would let him actually take pictures of workers there. It was 1199's first hospital, and Mo Foner, who was the sort of director of all sorts of things at 1199, had a program called Bread and Roses. And he said, work has to be more than just, work. It has to be culture and joy. And we bring theater performances and all these other things. So one thing that we did when I was at OSHA was Philip Levine was the poet laureate in 2011, 2012. And, he's a Detroit native, and he worked at the River Rouge plant and was a UAW member before he became a successful poet. He won the Pulitzer Prize. So we invited him to come to OSHA and talk about his poetry and the poetry around working in heavy industry. And they said, well, you should come to hear me speak. He was giving the last lecture and reading poetry at the Library of Congress, which is a beautiful auditorium there. It's going to have a little event before the cocktail party. And I said, great. And I told him we'd bring a bunch of people from OSHA. And so when we arrived, the thing that was just absolutely lovely. It's sort of this really fabulous memory is walking down the aisle and seeing rows 3 and 4 ribboned off with the sign that said reserved for OSHA. It was probably the first poetry reading at the Library of Congress. We did that, and he really talked about his work. It was really just this wonderful event. So OSHA is more than it's many things. But when we heard Secretary Hodgson at the beginning talking about how workplace safety is not something that has gotten a lot of attention, and we're hoping that OSHA brings more of it. And in some ways, that's really the parallel to right now. When for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, it was very difficult to get Americans and the press and the country to talk about worker safety. We would always say, well, mine workers, if they were, if a large number of miners were caught underground, that would be front page news and the rescue. But workers die every day by themselves, and all you see is a statement in the newspaper saying the police said it was an accident. But now, really with COVID, every day there are major stories in every sort of media about what's going on in terms of workers and their safety and their health and the conditions they face. And this is really, I think, our challenge now. And I'm saying this now only because I'm going to have to get off to go to a meeting a little bit later on COVID. But we have to really pursue this and remind the country that workers are at risk, not just for coronavirus, but for all these other, for ergonomic hazards and for exposure to carcinogens. And we can't just let this drop when eventually this pandemic is under control. It's an opportunity for us to continue to pursue this. So it's lovely to see all of you here. And I hope we can continue to do this. And thank you so much, Chip, for pulling this together, and for Earl and Mark for documenting this incredible history and that we're all really part of. So, thank you.
Thank you, David. Hey, is Andrea and John available? I know they wanted to talk.
Yeah.
Going back a ways.
Can you hear me?
Hi, Andrea. Hey,
Hi
John.
there. So in 1970, I had just gotten my master's in public health, and I went to work for Ralph Nader in Washington, D.C., and I soon met Tony Mazzocchi, and the OSHA law was just passed. And Carol, thank you. I think it was the next year that one of the young lawyers working in our group with Sid Wolf and Ralph Nader and I put together a petition to OSHA for the carcinogen standards. Yeah, so thank you. And I barely remember what they were. I think benzodine was part of it. I don't really remember. But I do think that having a group of chemicals like that can be regulated is really important, and that we've suffered a lot by having this one-by-one regulation, which takes so much effort these days to get through. I don't know how we could get it through otherwise these days, but I think that it was really important for us to have that little petition that we did. We spent a lot of time on it, but to have that be adopted. And for me, that connection with Ralph Nader and Sid Wolf and Tony Mazzocchi and the Steelworkers Union, et cetera. And then later, a little bit later, Earl Dotter and Matt Witt really solidified my, lifelong interest in occupational and environmental health. And so I really appreciate, I wasn't there for when the law was passed. I physically was there, but I wasn't totally aware of it. And then a couple months later, started working on occupational health and safety issues. So thank you all. And John, did you want to say something?
I'll say a few words. I was at OSHA, and I was working as the director of the Office of Toxic Substances under EULA. And my two main jobs was I worked with two other lawyers on the cotton dust standard, and then I wrote the lead standard with others. The important point, I think, is they are very special standards, as you might all know. But it's my feeling now that both those standards need updating because they're really out of time, and they deserve to be taken up again, especially the lead standard, where people haven't acknowledged the fact that there's no safe level for lead, and that's a big a major undertaking. I wanted to say a couple words. One thing I think we have to consider is what is OSHA going to do with respect to the state plan state. State plans tend to be very bad, I think, and they require at this point not only addressing standards at federal OSHA, but there needs to be an update. I think that one thing is missing is new standards that make a really good, better job of the risk assessment. And the OSHA needs to work with NIOSH to develop sophisticated standards that can be used in standard setting as opposed to a lack of interest.
Thank you,
And
John.
if I could just add something, and I did mention this in a call about EULA, but EULA appointed me to the National Advisory Committee on OSHA, and I was living in San Francisco and John was living in Washington, D.C., so I got to travel back and forth a lot. And as a result, we have had a 40-year marriage. So thank you, Occupational Health and Safety.
Thank you, guys. I think we have a long list, John, that will.
Let me jump in for 1 second. As we were talking, this just came out. I'm going to share my screen for 1 second.
Okay.
This just came out, and I'll put the URL in the.
Yay!
So in the chat room, you can take time to read it. It's a wonderful statement. We'll just read the last line for everybody. As president, I will work every day to uphold the mission of OSHA established 50 years ago and protect the safety and well-being of American workers. And you can read the whole thing, but it talks about.
Hey, David, did you write this?
I was going to say, who can find that?
I did not. But Ann Rosenthal, who's on the call, and I both strongly suggested that this be written. And what's even better about it, we didn't write it.
That's great.
Wow. Beautiful. Beautiful.
So I'll share that with everybody here.
That's so great, David. Thank you. Thank you for that. Charles Jeffers, do you want to say something? An old assistant secretary? Are you muted?
There we go.
Hey, how you
Old assistant secretary. I'm not sure who you're talking about, but I'm here. I'm glad to converse. You know, you never forget your first real formative success in any endeavor, and for me in occupational safety and health, it had to be the bisonosis and the brown lung campaign, and the success of that effort and that standard in eliminating bisonosis and protecting textile workers in the South, where I was in particular, was so huge and such a big impact. And I, forever thank Eula Bingham and you, Chip Hughes, and others who worked with you to really bring that to attention to make that pass. That, for me, in terms of big success, that's got to be one of OSHA's big successes in the area that I came from. Another big success, I think, and I don't even know who to thank for this, Ann Rosenthal probably does, is the concept of the instance by instance sanctions and citations that enabled OSHA to cite folks for every instance of an employee being exposed to a hazard. With the limitations on the penalties that are in the original act and the inability to increase them significantly, the ability to cite instance by instance has really made a difference in terms of OSHA's impact in getting folks get employers especially to pay attention to the liability there. So my hat's off to those folks in OSHA who came up with that and made that policy change and made it possible to be more effective in the workplace. Last thing I'd comment on is you asked before the meeting about, what would your hopes be for the future? Several folks have talked about the standards and how hard it is to adopt one and how many of them are out of date. I was an advocate years ago of this and continue to be an advocate of using one standard requiring a safety and health program for every workplace that's appropriate to that workplace to be passed. And in return for that, if we have to abolish 80% of the existing OSHA standards that are in place, I would say fine, because so many of them are out of date that they're not really useful for citing anyway. So maybe there's a trade-off that could be created someplace by saying, we will eliminate tens of thousands of pages of rules for every employer being responsible for having a safety and health program in their workplace that's appropriate for their workplace. I don't know if you get a buy-in on that or not, but it sure seems to me that the OSHA's ability to keep up with the hazards in the workplace demonstrates, we're not able to do that. We're not going to be able to do that. And for the future, the only way to keep these programs enforceable and relevant and effective, I think, is to require that the employer have something that's appropriate for their workplace and something that OSHA can then cite if the employer has failed to take into consideration the hazards they face in that workplace.
Beautiful. Thank you, Charles. More things to add to the agenda. And anybody else who wants to jump in and make some comments in terms of
Arturo
advocates?
Arturo has his hand raised.
Arturo, would you?
Yes.
Hey.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for the event, Chip, for everybody that is here. It's a great history lesson and a grounding experience. And I just want to thank OSHA also for passing a key part that says training should be given in a language and in a manner that workers understand. And to me, the beautiful thing about OSHA is not in the legislation, it's in the empowerment of workers for self-advocating and for improving the working conditions. And whenever in a democracy we give people a voice, it is a stronger democracy. Thank you for your vision, because legislation without training and without pushing for action is meaningless.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, brother. Anybody else want to jump in?
Chip, am I on? Can you hear me?
Yes. Please jump in.
Okay, well, I had the pleasure of being able to work closely with OSHA over the years. I actually had really was lucky to be able to create the department's television studio. And what we managed to do just before the Obama administration came in, Ken Pfeiffer, who's now the senior producer there, we tracked down every former assistant secretary to do this program, an OSHA retrospective. And I see David is on, and Charles is in it, and Jordan is there. The only thing that's incomplete about that show, which I'd like to see corrected, and I'm sure we can do it, is to have David on it, because I retired before we could get David videotaped for his perspective. And this show I can easily distribute to everybody on your email list. But I had the privilege of going around the country to so many companies that subscribed to the OSHA standards and went over and above, and to document those companies. We have them on video. A lot of it was VPP. Under David, we produced a program called Deadly Dust, which chronicles the importance of moving ahead with those standards to change what happens to those workers. And finally, I had the privilege of working with so many OSHA people around the country, doing workshops on how to deal with the media and how to do public speaking to get our message out. And for me, it was also a family affair, because I don't know how many of you know the name Max Gabus, but Max worked in the standards, I think, where they acquired all the testing equipment. And Max was my father-in-law. And I think the story was that whether you needed the equipment or not, Max would get it for you at the best price. And one final anecdote, I had the wonderful privilege of sitting with Eula Bingham and interviewing her candidly. And this little anecdote is on the tape. Those who saw the tape wanted me to take this one little piece out, but I refused to do it. Eula was talking about the field staff and how important is the field staff to her. And she said, I'll never forget when I can't remember the exact name, one field member came up to me and said, Eula, you got balls. And it's in the show, and that's where it's going to stay. And I just want to say how dedicated now that I am constantly to the work that all these people, all of you do and did do to keep people safe. And I got to see those factories with my own eyes and know how important it is. So thank you, and God bless all of you, and just stay well. Thank you for letting me talk.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Stanley. No, I love seeing that video about Eula and her balls. Anybody else who'd like to jump in? Who's on?
Could I briefly?
Dorothy.
Sure, Dorothy, hey.
So a couple of things, just I wanted to say, first of all, that I may be the only Canadian on here besides T, but back in the early 80s, when I started doing health and safety for the Manitoba government, I was really influenced by the work that John and Eula had done, although I didn't know their names at the time, or their association, around the lead standard, and then the work that had been done around the carcinogen standard. And had actually, as I was packing up to move recently, came across all kinds of documents that showed how these standards had been, I tried to incorporate them in what we called the health hazard regulation in Manitoba. That was sort of, there was a right to know stuff going on separately, but the idea was if you had a right to know, then once you found out stuff, you had to do something about it. And so the lead standard and the carcinogen standard really influenced me. I also recently have been part of various, some conversations around history. And I think that people on this call need to know that there are efforts going on to record the history of the National COSH, the APHA OHS section, and sort of some of these kinds of things. And so Mark Catlin and Joel Schufro are two people involved. And so if anybody's interested, they ought to get hold of them. And finally, I had a brief conversation with Mark Catlin recently around some work we're doing. And he was saying, aside from what he put in the chat box about trying to get the 300 logs and the injury records online, that it would be really nice to sort of get the new directions kind of thing going. And I said, well, why doesn't it get called the Eula Bingham program? And I think that that would be really tying in with what Arturo had to say about the importance of training in a language in a way that people understand, that would really be a real achievement. And it's something then that the rest of us on this side of the border might look to. So congratulations to all the many people here who have done so much over the years and from whom I've learned so much.
Beautiful, Dorothy, thank you.
Chip, could I follow Dorothy for a second?
Please, jump in.
Yeah, Dorothy, you and everyone else, great to see everyone. It's Greg Sawinski in Syracuse. So for me, I think the most significant OSHA initiative or outcome was really the putting inspection data and statistics on the web for all to see and use. And I think, you know, from my experience, it was a great way to actually, in some ways, for public damning of employers who just, you know, flaunt the stuff that we love and believe in. And so I think that effort, and I think that came under Jeffers' period, but it sort of has stalled out, you know, and I think there's so much opportunity for that to be really enhanced with mapping and crossing over to disease reports and environmental emission reports. Because if you start, you know, overlaying this stuff, it can really tell a story. So I guess that's my appreciation and my wish for the future.
Thank you, Greg. Beautiful. Jill James, you want to say something? I saw in the chat.
Yeah, yeah, thanks, Chip.
Hey,
hi, like Arturo, my passion, Chip, you know this, is around providing training in languages that everyone understands. And I've had the opportunity to do a little bit of digging on this with some professors at the University of North Dakota, where they would like to reinvent what we did back during the war efforts with graphic novels, to be able to use some language agnostic ways to train people. And I hope for the future of OSHA that we could solve for that problem on a federal level for everyone. And to John's point about state plan states before, I was an investigator with the state of Minnesota for a little over 12 years in the early 90s. And I'd like you to know, John, I did promulgate a standard, co-authored a rule in Minnesota called the Operation of Mobile Earth Moving Equipment. So some of us have done that, and gosh, that's something I'm so proud of. Every time I drive by a construction site or a roadside, I get to see that effort and work. And so that's so fun to be able to see. And I know so many of you here today have done same and similar. So thank you all to be able to stand on your shoulders at this time. Appreciate it.
Chip.
Hey.
Chip, can you hear me?
Hey, Joel.
Yes.
Hi.
Hi.
Jump in.
So since Dorothy mentioned it, we have a project going forward to help document the history of our movement. And as I look around the panel of people participating, you probably, like me, have all your papers in the garage waiting for some younger person to throw them out after you kick off.
Them away.
Yes. So we are working with on an arrangement with Columbia University, who is interested in developing an archives to document our movement. And we will be sending out shortly, I hope, a survey to all of you and others to find out the extent of the collection of papers that people have. So I plead with you not to throw them out, that things that you have in your garage and elsewhere, but to keep them so that they can be used to help us document our history. And I do want to just also just talk about my memory. I drove Eula Bingham out from LaGuardia to the end of Long Island for a conference that NICOSH put on. I think 1990 thereabouts, on the 20th anniversary of OSHA. And in that drive, I asked her what she thought the most important thing she had done in the time that she was at OSHA. And she talked about setting up the New Directions program as the most important thing, as educating workers, putting the knowledge in the hands of workers. And I thought that was really important.
We're all her children.
May I say one quick thing before we?
Oh, I think Michael was going to talk.
Oh, go ahead.
Had his hand raised for a while.
Yeah, thanks, Chip.
Hi, Michael.
You know, I'm flooded with memories of collaborative projects and relationships with all the folks online here, and that's really quite moving. But I wanted to just share two quick things related to the history that we've been talking about, because keeping this history alive really means a lot for the future. And I'll just mention two quick things. The first is that I took all of my UAW documents and contributed those to the Walter Reuther Library in Detroit, where they were professionally cataloged and documented. And I would suggest that people check to see where in your communities there are library resources that will do the same kind of thing, so that a lot of these records can be preserved and can become accessible to others. The other thing I wanted to mention is that I've actually got here 4 volumes of the legislative history of the OSHA Act. About 5,000 pages worth. I think that these were bequeathed to me by Sharon Morris when I went to work for OSHA in the early 90s. They are now sitting here on the library, on the bookshelf of a retiree who isn't making much use of them. And I would be happy to donate these. Maybe it's something that Joel could take advantage of, but there may be others who think that having putting this documentation in a more useful place would be valuable. And so contact me if you think that you have a place where I could send these.
Beautiful. Thank you, Michael and Barbara. Andrea?
John has been looking through a lot of old papers for possibly writing a memoir, and a number of them show him, well, first in Vermont, where he tried to get into he did get into the state health department, but then when Eula wanted to hire him for OSHA, there were all of these newspaper stories and letters to Congress about how can you hire one of the Chicago 7 to get $36,000 a year for a job at OSHA. And
let's investigate. Let's have an investigation.
Really, let's block him. So it's so he's going to incorporate those into his memoir. But I think that it's quite a collection of newspaper articles that are really quite fun. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Anybody else want to jump in? I mean, I feel like we want to make sure everybody gets. Ruth Capelli, do you want to say anything? You go back a ways. Lost her.
Chip, Steve has his hand raised as well.
Oh, I was just asking Ruth if she wanted to say something.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Chip.
Hey, Ruth.
Hey. So I think New Directions is something we need to applaud. I think there are a lot of unions that would never have set up the infrastructure that they did had it not been for New Directions. And that, I mean, the data is important and the field is important, but getting unions to have some infrastructure, I think, was really critical. The one thing I'd like to see for the future is criminal prosecution. I think we've gotten to a point in this country where a lot of it ends up in the courts, as regs always did, and that what's been going on in this country with COVID is criminal. And I wish Julian Epstein had kept doing that work, because he did some really great work years and years ago.
Yep.
But I wish someone would take up that mantle again, because I think it's one of the few ways we're going to get change.
Thank you, Bruce. Beautiful. Anybody else want to jump in?
So Chip,
Yes.
I was just going to quickly say, I wanted to tip my OSHA hard hat that David Michaels gave me and say, I had the pleasure of working with Earl Dotter over the years. He's a national treasure, and I just hope he keeps on looking through that camera and documenting worker safety in this country.
I think
Chip?
Yes.
I think it would, after an hour and a half on this thing.
Yeah.
It would behoove us to remember in your honor, all right, in your honor, the fact that the program you've run for these 30 years was a function of the training program that was built on OSHA, and that the standard for the hazmat is an OSHA standard that was put into the statute by several of us, but it is an OSHA protection. But for that, you would have some very bad situations.
Yeah, I think one of the things you always talked to me about, Don, was nobody records all the bodies that never died or got sick or were lost their health. And again, I know that's going to be an issue that's with us, which the incalculable toll of COVID, and what that's going to mean for our country. But yeah. Dan Brustein. I just, in the chat box, a couple of last words if people want to jump in. That was from Craig.
May I?
Yes, please.
Yeah. My perspective was a little different from what some other folks have said, but I saw a lot of the same things. And that is, I started as a field IH in 1976. So I was there before OSHA. He came in later in that year. And then either that year or the following year, John Freund, we met at an AHA conference, and John asked me if I would address an APHA conference about what it was like to be a field IH. And I did, and one of the things I discussed was some of the limits and the problems with enforcement. What I didn't discuss was the fact that a large part of the agency was staffed at the middle administrative levels with people who had been rejected by private industry because they were incompetent, not because private industry didn't like their attitudes. And they were still there. They were still a real drag on the agency. So despite great leadership, we still had to deal with the problems of this middle level administration, who were generally pretty hostile to employees in many areas. One of the things I pointed out was that I had heard at that time that there was some talk of the possibility of developing a new program that would allow greater involvement of employees themselves, of workers themselves, in dealing with safety and health problems. And that, of course, was the New Directions program that was announced very shortly after I gave this talk, after I was formally disciplined when I got back to my own office for having criticized OSHA. And I was lucky enough in 1978, very late in 78, to go to work with the United Rubber Workers Union, a union which already had a highly developed safety and health program, but with New Directions program was able to really allow it to grow and expand. And that was my perspective on the things we saw here. So I think that one of the things, I'd like to second those who pointed out the real importance of the New Directions program as one of the things that OSHA accomplished.
Wow. Thank you. Yeah, I think we're at near the end of our hour and a half. I didn't know if any folks who hadn't talked want to put in a last word.
Peter.
Chip.
Peter.
Yeah, Peter Dooley with National Kosh. Hi, everyone. Hey, just a couple of points sort of on the final stretch here. A memorial to Jim Moran from Philipposh, who passed away a month ago, but was the champion of grassroots health and safety campaigns to fight to save OSHA when it was under threat from legislative, gutting from the Ballinger bill and Schweiker bill and various other ones. Also a champion of criminal prosecution with the Emmett Rowe prosecution and such. And those, those kind of campaigns, grassroots campaigns, have really been tremendously important to this movement to really try to make OSHA, the law, really kind of the reality of what it's designed to do, but really can't do just as a legal apparatus. But also just, you know, calling out the ways that OSHA in some circumstances have really supported worker effort to organize, and various ways that worker has been able, because of dedicated people within OSHA that have really, you know, sort of know what it's about in terms of worker struggles to be fighting for their rights and get united as part of organizing campaigns and other ones. So hopefully we can be doing more of that in the future.
Definitely.
Thanks.
Thank you for that, Peter. Always an inspiration. Anyway, I think we're near the end. Anybody else, any last words? If not,
Thank you for doing a wonderful job of this.
oh yeah. Well,
Thanks.
it was, hey, Rosie, it's part of the boosting our spirits for what the work is that we have ahead. And I know all of you are going to be part of that. And our challenge is, I think, unlike anything we've ever had in OSHA's history. So, you know, keep on keeping on. And we'll see everybody in the new year. And thanks so much for everybody sharing the stories. We'll try to document this and keep it for the future. And also all the chat box comments that we'll try to preserve as well. So I think for myself and Mark, Don, Joy, Deborah, we'll just say thanks to all of you, and best for the holidays, best for the new year. Build back better, build back safer. Over.
And healthier.
Yeah, and healthier, definitely.